These are 10 of the cheapest PlayStation games that you should buy. Some of them are a little bit older, but some of them are brand new for the PS5. Let's first start off with one of my favorite games of all time, which is Mad Max. This was originally released on the PS4, but has aged incredibly well considering that it came out in 2015. I originally played Mad Max on the PC and completed the entire storyline along with a bunch of side quests. It was incredibly fun. I found the art style and graphics were very beautiful, and I also enjoyed the gameplay. It's made by the same studios that do those Batman games like Arkham Knight and all those types of things. So it does have an element of like spamming square quite a lot, but there was a skill tree that did allow you to level up your character and also add different abilities just to make things a little bit more interesting. By far, one of the coolest features in this game is the car customization. You can go to town and really customize your car and then leverage this vehicle within combat against other cars and also while you take down the various different bases. I really enjoyed this feature of basically attacking all of the different bases around the map and then making the area safe and secure. And you could use your vehicle with a cool tow rope to make this challenge a little bit easier. I think it has a very strong storyline. If you enjoy any of the movies, you will really enjoy the game right here. And you can pick this game up for like £3 to £4 in some sales now and again, so it's worth it. It does run at 1080p 30 FPS as it is an older title, but if you look past that, it's definitely worth a try. Now this next title is another one that is very old and doesn't have the greatest performance, but did recently launch for the PS5. This is Toy Story 3 Remastered. This was originally released on the PSP way back in the day. I had this on the Nintendo DS and also on the Xbox 360. Completed it on both of those platforms, and now you can complete it again on the PS5. So essentially they've taken the PSP version, ported it over to console, improved the graphics and performance a little bit, nothing too crazy. They've essentially just enhanced it with some upscaling and up rendering, and added some new features such as rewinds, quick saves, and some custom video filters. Everything about this game is essentially exactly the same as the PSP version, but you can pick this thing up for $3.99 on the PlayStation Store or get it with your PS Plus Premium subscription. Don't ask me why it's on the PS Plus Premium and not like the lower tiers like Extra. I wouldn't really describe this as a premium game, but you do have to have that higher tier in order to access it. Now, if you want to relive the pure nostalgia from your childhood, you could pair this game with something like the latest PlayStation Portal, which essentially allows you to stream the game from your PS5 to a handheld device, so it's kind of reminiscent of your PSP. I do have a review of the PlayStation Portal available on my main channel. I think it's quite a cool little device, most specifically because it has the DualSense vibration, all of the adaptive triggers and stuff still in it, so you don't lose those features via the cloud gaming. And also the quality of the 1080p 60 FPS display looks absolutely brilliant when streaming your titles. Now, even though Toy Story 3 doesn't have the longest single player mode, if I remember correctly from the Xbox 360, it did have this free play mode where you could go about and build different buildings, do little side missions, and basically it's like a sandbox where you could build your own little Toy Story village. And I actually spent way too many hours within this after I completed the main storyline. On the topic of story games, next up we've got Metro Exodus Gold Edition. Now, Metro Exodus is a PlayStation 5 title. It was released for the PS5. It has the DualSense features, you know, some adaptive triggers, very immersive game, and you can literally pick this thing up for about $4.99. It's pretty ironic. The DLCs cost more than the main game at the moment. Now, of course, a lot of the games I'm mentioning in this video are currently on sale, but these sales do happen very frequently, every couple of weeks or every season, you know, like spring, Black Friday, whatever. So you can very easily get these titles for these prices. Now, Metro Exodus, it was one of the first games I purchased for my PlayStation 5 when I picked up the console, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I played a good sort of 5-6 hours, I would say, of the game overall. Visually absolutely stunning. It really leverages the performance of the PlayStation 5. It shows it off at 4K 60 FPS. You can play it in HDR. As I previously mentioned, it has the cool features for the DualSense controller. But I actually bought this like almost full price. It's like £34-40, something crazy like that, around a year or two ago when I got my PlayStation 5 when it first came out. So to get the exact same game for less than £4, I think is an absolute bargain and thoroughly worth it, because this game is huge. You know, it's got lots of different, obviously it's a huge storyline game, but lots of different environments. You got the more like snowy environments, then you go to like a cool desert more latterly within the game. Much more stuff going on than previous titles like the Metro Redux in 2023. 2023 is it? 2033. The one that they remastered, you know, for the from the old generation. This has much more depth, I would say, to the environments that you play within, which just keeps the overall game quite engaging to play. Another one of my personal favorite games from my childhood, just like Mad Max, is Chivalry II. Now, this is a medieval combat game that originally with the Chivalry that I played back in the day on the PC. Then they made Chivalry II that I did play on the PC briefly, and it was on the PS4, and now it's available on the PS5. Now, Chivalry II is a medieval combat game where you basically play with swords and shields, and you're slashing people up. It's quite brutal, really. You have these very large-scale PvP multiplayer matches where you go about about trying to, take over a castle, capture different objectives. There's a bunch of different game modes. There's even this cool game mode where you gotta like move these rocks in like a container or something like that, like in a barrow with wheels on. So there's lots of different game modes that you can play. It's a bunch of fun with some friends because you can obviously have an element of team play within there if you actually want to take this seriously, but also it's a completely fresh approach to like a multiplayer game. Obviously used to playing FPS shooters or like a third person shooter. This is obviously first person with your sword, bow and arrow, a bunch of different things. It really strips back the gameplay, and I think it's very engaging. Graphically, it looks absolutely stunning, especially the PlayStation 5 version that recently got updated and released. You can pick this game up for around £14, $15, nothing too crazy, and I do think it's truly worth that. I played Chivalry 1 loads, and that was when it was in early access. Then we played Chivalry 2 quite briefly when it first came out, then we moved on to some other titles when I was sort of a teenager. The PS5 version of Chivalry 2 does run at 4K 60 FPS. You can also play in multiplayer matches of 64 players, which is very similar to the older Battlefields, like Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4, so plenty of players within there. And you can immerse yourself within cinematic battles that are inspired by epic medieval action films. The maps and environments are very vast, with large-scale conflicts ranging from tournament grounds all the way to full-scale castle sieges. You can choose between 4 different classes and also 12 subclasses, each with their own weapons and abilities, which really does hone in on that team play element with your friends, so you can all have a purpose within your squad. Next up, we actually have a PlayStation VR 2 title, which is City Skylines. Now, obviously there's the new version, City Skylines 2, that's coming out very soon. I was a huge player of the original City Skylines 1, probably sunk 30, 40 hours onto that title, but now you can actually play this game in virtual reality, which is just obscene. So inside of the virtual reality version, you're literally like God. You can see the entire map with the headset on. It's huge, and then you can use all of the controllers to draw the roads, map out the different areas, like the industrial areas, the residential areas, the city areas for commercial, etc. You can draw all of those out with the almost like a spray gun with the VR controllers, as well as then actually physically see almost like a huge train set, you could say, in front of you, how your 3D world actually looks. You can then traverse and walk around it like a huge giant, see how it all operates and works, sort out problems. One of the biggest issues I always had with the PC version was once the map got quite big, it's quite difficult to see where everything was. If you're having traffic jam issues, you couldn't quite figure out what was going on without zooming in. Whereas with the VR version, you can literally almost walk down the street and be like, okay, this is why it's not working. Let's reposition this building, reposition this road, put a train line here, etc. It's very cool. I would never have expected City Skylines to work so well within a virtual reality version, and it's definitely worth picking up if you're a super lucky owner of the PSVR 2. Now, one game that I'm quite surprised to see being sold at this price is Grid Legends. Now, this isn't the best racing game in the world, but it isn't really that old, maybe a year and a half old at best, and you can pick this thing up for £6 right now. Grid Legends was one of the first next generation racing games to be released. Obviously, we had Dirt 5, was it, or something like that, and there was no games like Gran Turismo 7 out just yet, but Grid Legends launched just before that title. So it did have quite high expectations for a racing game to showcase what the next generation power could do for a title like this. I've played Grid games in the past. Grid Legends wasn't too terrible. Obviously, the physics is a lot different to something like Gran Turismo or even Forza. Definitely got more of that arcadey vibe about it, but it can still be a lot of fun, especially if you want to play more of the storyline and those types of missions within the racing levels. Now, it did have a mixed bag when it came out. A lot of people thought it was an awful game, but when you actually look at the overall reviews on the PlayStation Store, it does hover around 4 stars, so it can't be too bad. So it's definitely worth £6, you could say. Now, on the topic of racing games, let's switch our focus to one that is absolutely exceptional, and that is Assetto Corsa Competizione. Now, this game is available within your PlayStation Plus Extra subscription. You don't need premium like Toy Story 3, you can just have your base level extra. Now, if you don't have PlayStation Plus Extra, you can pick this thing up for £10.50, which is an absolute bargain, but I would advise that you do own a steering wheel for this racing game in particular, as it is a simulator and it's much more realistic. If you have no experience with Assetto Corsa, this used to be available only on PC, and then they did start porting it over to console. Now, the PC versions of these games are vastly different. They're much more hardcore. There's a lot of mods and things on there, but this is a fantastic title if you're looking for something a little bit more serious and you're still gaming on console. So you just want to sort of start to dip your toes into those more simulator style racing games, ones that have got league racing or sort of rating systems online as well. So you got almost like iRacing with your iRating, but you just aren't ready to take that jump over to hardcore PC gaming just yet. Assetto Corsa Competizione is a fantastic middle point because both it has incredible graphics and visuals, as well as great physics and a huge range of different cars. It's very specifically focused on sort of the GT3, GT4 racing cars, sort of them Porsches, the Caymans, the 911 GT3 RSs, all those styles of vehicles, some Aston Martins, different things like Lamborghinis. A very fun and diverse racing genre that is one of my favorites. Now let's switch our focus away from racing games for a brief moment moment, and let's take a look at a survival title. Now, this one in particular, you're probably going to think looks awful, and it's called Star Sand. Now, graphically, this game is pretty bad. I'm not gonna lie. It looks like something from the early 2008s. That's even maybe a compliment, maybe the 90s in terms of its overall graphics capabilities. But I do think it is something a little bit different on the PlayStation Store, and definitely a different genre of game. It's quite similar to Stranded Deep in terms of like, it's sort of like a solo survival game, but it's set in like a desert, and you go about, you know, crafting, fighting against the environment, fighting against the heat. You can build yourself a little base, different stuff like that. Now, obviously, Stranded Deep is much more developed than this title. This is still kind of an early access title, you could say. Stranded Deep is obviously a survival island game that's got lots of different things. It's got like sharks, all that type of stuff, and it's been in development for much longer. But for around $15, Star Sand is maybe worth a purchase and having a little look. It's just it's a completely different style of game that you don't traditionally get on console. There's a lot of titles like this on PC, you know, early access survival games. It's, you know, there's loads of those on the Steam store, but I often don't come across these when browsing the PlayStation Store. Now, one of my favorite games from a kid was a title called Spin Tires. This has now recently been released with a sequel and sort of rebranded, and it's called Snowrunner. Now, Snowrunner basically puts you in the seat of these old vehicles that you can go about, and you got to drive them over very difficult terrain. So it's usually like really hard mud, so the vehicles will get stuck in the mud. You got to be very tactical about how you go through certain roads, or whether you turn around and take a different route. It's a completely different approach to your traditional driving games that you often see, that are just usually like racing games and you know, free roam driving games or whatever. You've got to overcome things like mud, torrential water, snow, frozen lakes, all while trying to complete contracts and missions, so you can't get like the stuff damaged. So it just adds that element of you know, a bit of a challenge to it. Now, you can play this game completely solo or up to 4-player co-op. I used to play Spin Tires, which was the first version of this game, a lot as a kid with my friend, and we used to have these little jeeps, and it was really good with friends because it means you could help each other out if you got stuck in the mud. You could tow each other out and basically reset your characters. And what makes this game so unique is the physics engine and the extreme environments that it puts you in as a driver. In Snowrunner, there are 40 unique vehicles that you can unlock, upgrade, and also customize. So there's a lot of different things that you can try out in terms of driving, and these are all branded as well. You've got vehicles from brands such as Ford and Chevrolet, just to name a few. Now, this is a completely open world game, so you don't even need to do the contracts. You could just literally hop in some trucks, drive around, explore the map, and just have a lot of fun with getting stuck with all the different physics. And on the PlayStation 5, this title does run at 4K 60 FPS with highly improved visuals and super fast loading compared to past generation versions of this. Now, the final title on this list is also a remaster and remake for the PlayStation 5, and that is The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Now, this was a very exceptional game made by CD Projekt Red, the same studio developers behind Cyberpunk 2077, which is another pretty popular title. But Witcher 3 was originally released back in sort of 2016, if I recall, on the Xbox One, and the biggest problem with it was the open world loading screens. So it was like an open world game, but basically you would enter a new area, and because it was such a detailed sort of next generation title back then, you would have a loading screen to load in that next segment of the map, whereas that's kind of been resolved with the PS5 version of this. Obviously, we've now got the super fast NVMe SSD drive, which now means the open world is actually open world and you can explore it much more freely. Now, if you've never played The Witcher 3 before, it's a brilliant game. It's got a lot of decent gameplay. There's a lot of different sort of paths you can take with leveling up your character. The storyline's fantastic. Obviously, there's the Netflix series as well that is really cool. So, you know, it sort of ties in a little bit with the Wild Hunt of The Witcher 3. So if you've watched that, it's definitely worth a play. And you can pick it up very cheap on the PlayStation 5 for around £7, $8, nothing too crazy. And it's definitely worth it with these next generation upgrades that were added to it recently. Now, obviously, there is a disadvantage to these cheap PlayStation games, and that is the fact that they are a little bit old. So if you want to see me break down 10 of the newest PS5 games releasing this year that you have to play, you should check out this video next, and also subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this.